If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. Hunters, what is the scariest, creepiest thing you saw out there in the woods? I go walking in the woods near my place and 3 terrifying things have happened, and every single one was in the same section of trail. The first was one of the earliest times I went walking. I wasn't entirely sure of my timing to get to the opposite end of the woods and back, and I ended up walking 2/3 RDS of the way back in the dark. I had a flashlight which I could use part of the time, but wasn't able to leave on. I would flash it on, set my course, and walk until I felt I needed to check again. I'm walking through the pitch dark, and I hear something about 50 yards back scream. It scared the shit out of me. I picked up my pace a bit when suddenly whatever it was screamed again. About 15 feet away at my 11 o'clock. I hadn't heard anything move and I booked it. I leaned later that it may have been foxes, but I never went walking out there again without a means of self-defense. The second time was on late afternoon walk. Same spot on the trail, I was walking and it was almost Disney-like. Birds singing, bugs chirping, squirrels. Squirreling? There was a small breeze and it was lovely out. Suddenly, at the exact same time, the wind stopped, the sun dropped behind a cloud, and every single animal stopped doing anything. The entire woods went completely still and silent. I had never understood deafening silence until that moment. I tensed up and kept moving, and about 10 seconds later, sound returned and everything went back to normal. I took the same way back and it didn't happen again. The third time was about a month later. I was walking down that way and I was looking about a little more, as this time I was out at midday and it was as bright as deep woods gets. I noticed something off the trail and went to look at it. I found a deer trail that I could follow and realized that the high grass hid a deep ditch off that trail that the river cut out during flooding. It had been dry, so I dropped into it. I'm a big dude at about 6.5 feet tall, and the edge of this ditch was at my eye level and probably about 10 feet across. I decided to follow it and come out at the river and then work my way down the bank until I hit the trail again. I walked about 25 feet and had to work over a tree that had collapsed into the ditch at a curve in its path. I came to the other side and froze. There was deer everywhere. Not plural deer, a single deer spread over the entirety of the ditch. The ribs were closest, the skull was across the ditch from them, and all the other bones were scattered about like it had hit a landmine. There was a definite stench to the area and the bones were dry but still had sinew strung about them in spots. It took me all of about 3 seconds to realize that I was standing in something's dining room. I backed up to the tree, used it as my point of egress from the ditch and, ignoring the voice in my head saying not to bust straight through the underbrush to the path, busted straight through the underbrush to the path. I came out at, you guessed it, that creepy spot on the woods trail. I walked swiftly to a different trail, and walked through the open field to get home. I don't know precisely what lives in that section of the woods, but it always freaks me out to see parents taking their toddlers out there to walk. It's a curvy path up to that section, which is a straightaway with flat ground and the underbrush making a well-defined path. I know people let their kids run up and down it since they can see all the way to end and the kids have the ability to run freely without being out of sight. I know it's probably not going to happen, but I always mentally see a kid running away from his parents down the path, a rustle of brush, a flash of fur, and the sound of little Billy being carried off into the woods. A couple things. I still love hunting but I haven't gone in almost 3 years. My dad and I were in a box stand, and heard an owl. We're all like, hey, that's cool. Then we hear this god-awful screaming. Picture 15-year-old me clutching a rifle and my 46-year-old dad clutching a .308 and both of us framed the hell out. Then we realized the owl caught a rabbit. Shit screamed like a woman being quartered with a rusty knife. On the same lease of land, we had this natural creek. The source was an aquifer that we never could locate, but my grandpa knew where it was. The water was 8 inches to over 6 feet deep at points, a crystal blue, and just beautiful, and was perfect for just sitting and listening to. I was hiking around it, trying to track the source, and heard a noise. A week or so prior, my friend and I were fucking around the woods near my house, and were like, Lamau, what if we found Bigfoot or something? There was like 2 acres of woods, and then we headed back to our house. The woods across the road though, there was a lot more. At the edge of our house, we see this pretty big shadow. It was getting dark, being winter and all, and we were like, Lamau, no. And ran inside. Back to the lease, about 8 miles from our house. I'm about a 30-minute trek to the field where my dad and grandpa are setting bait for the upcoming hunting season, so it's about half a mile. I'm following a natural trail, and hear this cracking to my left. I look, and there's this 7.5 shadow. Not even what Bigfoot looks like, but like a shadow figure, tall and thin. As I've said in previous posts, I'm part Native American, don't look it, due to Irish genes on my mom's side, but my great-grandpa was full blood, so he had some cool stuff about reserves and all, but also some legends. But I've talked to others, and skinwalkers, wendigos, all of that I know about and fully believe in. So me seeing a shadow that makes little to no sound staring at me, I'm like, don't think about what it might be, get the fuck out of here and don't acknowledge it. I turn around, and walk as carefully and quickly as I can away. Every now and then I'd steal a look, and it was always about 10 to 20 yards behind me. At this point I'm shitting steel rods, hoping that whatever I'm seeing isn't some demon wanting to wear my skin as a suit, and it was probably the most tense hour or so of my life trying to get back, because what was usually 30-ish minutes turned into me getting lost a couple times because I was so scared. But I made my way back to the field, and once I got out of the tree line, my ass was hauling across the field, demon be damned. It's been a few years and I've moved to a different state, but I would love to go back because it's something I've never solved. Obligatory, not me but my uncle. One year during deer season my uncle went out on the general hunt. He hiked a few miles in the middle of the night to get to his spot. When he got there he heard some soft moans. And couldn't find where it was coming from, but then noticed something large high up in a tree. Since it was still dark he disregarded it and walked to his tree stand and settled in for the morning. As the light grew he started to get a better and better picture of what was up in the tree. To his horror it was a slumped over man. He quickly got freaked out and then noticed through his spotting scope that it was a dead hunter sitting in a tree stand. Turns out the guy died of a heart attack, and my uncle likely experienced his last moments of life, but didn't realize what was happening. My uncle always talked about how creepy it was being in the forest early morning and going through that situation. We, my cousins and I, would always hear this story on Halloween. When I got older I assumed it was something to spook us, but my dad confirmed it was true. Not a hunter, but I live in the deep south, and when I was a kid my family owned a big stretch of property in the woods. We still do technically speaking, but I don't live close to there, and my favorite place to play was out in the middle of the trees where I could pretend to be a fantasy adventure character or hunt fairies or whatever. I was little and really into that. But then at some point I started to discover abandoned hunting camps and stands. Like not abandoned in the sense that no one used it in a while, not unusual in the off seasons, but as in, half-eaten cans left to dust and rot, sleeping bags left there just to ruin in the rain, things in general left in a state that suggested they left in a hurry. But at one point I found an abandoned stuffed animal and pillow that literally was moldy. Logic says maybe the owners are just super irresponsible, but when I was like 7 it gave me a really bad vibe and I didn't go that far out again. And then later as an adult once I saw a boar and I was like, perhaps not. I've seen old Yeller lol. The brother-in-law and myself out doing some night fishing for catfish. Was around end of summer / beginning of fall in upstate NY. We were down a pretty steep bank that had a landing pad type formation at the bottom. We had been getting subtle rigs from the bells, yes bells, they clip onto your rod and ring when a fish hits or takes the bait. No fish though. After about an hour we started hearing crunching leaves up over the steep bank. We kept flashing our lights up there but could not see anything. We had a propane lantern for ambient light and headlamps for spotting / tying knots etc. Over the course of the next 3 hours we would hear something walking on the top of the bank. Never saw a thing. Kept going back and forth about the uneasy feeling we kept getting. Talked ourselves into thinking it was a coyote. Not many big predators where I live. Coyotes being the main concern usually, so we don't bring self-defense weapons. Welp, we got skunked and caught nothing. Packed up all our gear and loaded it in the truck. I lit a cigarette and we were talking about the noises we kept hearing. We looked around the truck in the foliage, nothing. Finished my smoke and we got in the truck. I started it up and flicked my headlights on. Boom. Right there in front of the truck, staring into the lights, puma. They don't natively live in NY, apparently they migrate through. Needless to say I just drove away. Shaking the whole way home. Now we bring some form of self-defense no matter what we are fishing for or where we are going. The fact that this thing was circling us for hours, stalking us, freaky. It had the high ground as well, so had it pounced I have no doubt one of us would be seriously hurt if not dead. Freaky man. Wasn't quite bad enough to keep me out of the woods but definitely sent me home the day it happened. Several years ago I was deer hunting in a very remote section of a national forest in northern Wisconsin and had a very weird experience that spooked me pretty good. I was hunting from a ladder stand about 20 feet off the ground. It was late morning on a cloudy, dead calm, no wind day. All of a sudden I heard what sounded like a whooshing sound right over my head. It startled me cause I didn't see anything to go along with the whooshing sound. The only way I can describe it is that it was the sound you would expect to hear if a large bird, like eagle or hawk sized, flew 5 to 10 feet over your head. Not wings flapping, but just like a whooshing or swooping sound. It was weird because I've spent a lot of time in the woods over many years to know that large birds don't often fly close to people, much less right over your head, unless it's like a seagull at the beach or something. Big birds in the woods sure as hell don't fly toward humans often, at least not in my experience. Anyway, at this point I just assumed that the sound must have been a bird of some type and I must have just looked up too late to see it. Whatever. Back to deer hunting. Then about 10 minutes later it happened again, but this time I actually saw a shadow on the ground moving towards me before I heard the sound. The shadow was somewhat faint, but it definitely looked like the shadow of a bird, so I thought for sure I would see the bird this time. I looked up in the air above the shadow, and then just as it got to me I heard and felt the whooshing again, this time even closer than before. It actually made me flinch and duck my head, like something big had just barely missed my head from above. I didn't see anything despite wildly swinging and swiveling my head up, around and behind me to try and catch whatever just dive-bombed me. So now in my head I'm thinking there's no question that a big-ass bird of some type definitely just flew at or right over my head twice, but somehow I missed seeing it both times. Thoughts racing through my mind, this thing is some kind of stealthy MF bird. Why the hell is a bird swooping on me? Am I near its nest or something and it's trying to warn me off? It's late fall/early winter. I should clarify at this point, in case people don't know what a ladder stand is, that I am in a wide open metal chair with an 18-foot ladder attached to it, leaning up against a tree with my back against the trunk. There are very few branches above me, and only a few below me. The point is my vision wasn't obscured in any way above or below me, and I'm surrounded by leafless trees, so the chances of a large bird being able to come at me and swoop on me without being seen coming or going is 0. 0. I wasn't really scared yet at this point. Just confused as hell. I started rationalizing maybe it was an owl. I've heard they can be super quiet when they fly. Maybe he came from a different angle than the sound and shadow suggested and I just missed him. But why couldn't I even catch a backside view after it swooped past though? This was a fucking invisible bird. The story doesn't get any different or more dramatic from here, other than the same thing happened maybe 4 to 5 more times over the course of about an hour, including the shadow on the ground. Each time it comes at me from a different angle, and each time it seems to graze just barely above my head. I'm not gonna lie, I eventually started freaking out inside because the only 2 plausible explanations at that moment were that I was either being harassed by an actual invisible bird or I was losing my marbles alone in the woods. I was genuinely leaning toward the latter, to be honest. Packed up my gear, climbed down and headed back to camp. The next day I took my stand down and moved it about a half-mile away. Never heard or saw the invisible bird again, but it stuck with me for years afterwards. Still does. It was gun deer season in northern Y. I was sitting in an open tree stand that was relatively low to the ground. In front of me, to my left was dense shrubbery, and to my right, there was an opening before the woods started. All of a sudden, I heard some rustling in the bushes to the left. 2 little fluff balls came tumbling out into the open area. Initially, I had no idea what they were. I was intently focused on them, trying to figure out what animal this was. Then I heard the deepest and scariest growling coming from behind me. I immediately froze. Next thing I knew, I had a mother bobcat circling my tree. It might have only been a minute or 2, but it felt like an eternity. She continued circling the tree, growling at me and never taking her gaze off of me. Finally the cubs decided they were done playing and everyone moved on. I will never forget the sound of that growl and the intensity of the bobcat's eyes staring at me. After I came back in, I told this story to my dad. He seemed rather excited, saying that he hasn't seen any wild bobcats in the area yet. However, I did not feel so lucky about the encounter at the time. Not in the woods but underwater, I was spear fishing at night with a pretty powerful flashlight when out of the dark came this foot-long snake-looking thing. Almost gave me a heart attack. Turned out to be a ragworm swimming towards my face. A couple of minutes later, another one came swimming at me. 10 minutes later the water was full of these long suckers all around me in the dark. Creeped me out. Turned out it was mating season, which makes them leave their holes in the sand, swimming up to release their sperm by destroying their bodies, dying in the process. Torchlight must have been drawing them out as if it was the full moon or something. I'll be checking for ragworm mating season every time I'm planning to go spear fishing. Not sure if this qualifies, but I went hunting a couple times with my dad while I was in high school. We were on a week-long trip hunting for elk, so it involved a lot of hiking through the woods, trying not to get noticed. I should note, though, that deer season had just started before the end of our trip. We were still wearing bright orange though, mind you. At one point, we crossed over a ridge and were making our way towards a valley, trying to see if there was anything down near a clearing at the bottom. Suddenly, we hear gunshots, and the unmistakable sound of at least one bullet whizzing by not far from us. We looked towards the source of the noise further down the valley, and there were other hunters sitting in lawn chairs with their rifles up and beer cans all around them. I don't know if they were drunk or just were in the mood to shoot at anything that moved, but I've been afraid to go hiking during deer season ever since. My mom was out in the woods. She goes by herself if she can't find anyone to go with, which I hate, and found some very clearly human hair. I think she thought it had been ripped out of the scalp? Given the woods and lake, the idea of what could have caused that were not good. So she called the police. They thought it sounded bad, too, but they gave her the evidence bag for some reason. She tried to back to the same spot, but either she couldn't find it, or the hair was gone. Didn't make her not want to go back. I'd think the weird man standing just outside the woods a different time who told her flat out he'd been waiting for her would. My uncle happened to be with her, thank God, and as soon as he popped out of the woods a few seconds later, the dude split. Since then, I've begged her not to go alone, but she still does. Once when we were together, some guy and his young son were poaching. It was off season or like at least not shotgun season, being mid-spring and all, and obviously we weren't wearing bright orange because why would we? But then we're in the woods hearing gunfire, and we're like shit and have to get the fuck out. The dude came out and tried to make friendly conversation and my mom just glared and made pointed comments about how illegal it was to be out there with a gun that day. The dude got uncomfortable and left. Not me, but my dad and brother-in-law. We just got this story a few weeks ago and it made me laugh for days. My parents live on a big plot of land and the hunters in the family hunt deer and wild turkey out there during the season. My Bill would go out there by himself after work a lot. One day he went out, got situated and then it hit him. He had to take a shit. So he went a ways into the woods to let it all out. It then occurs to him that he doesn't have anything to wipe with, so he reluctantly used his sock hat and buried it afterwards. Fast forward to the next day. Everyone is sitting up at the house hanging out on the patio when my dad comes up, holding the sock hat. He says, "I think someone's been illegally hunting on my land." He had no idea it was Bill's hat. Our dog or another critter must have dug it up to investigate and my dad found it. Bill was horrified but didn't want to say anything because he always wants my dad to like him. This happened years ago, but at my birthday party last month it finally came to light that my dad was carrying and waving around Bill's shitty sock hat. I'd if this story counts, but I just like telling it. Okay, here is one from me. I was about 17 or so, living in upstate NY. It was deer season and I was hunting on a raised area between two swamps. This was a great spot akin to a superhighway for the deer. Mind you, this spot is not close to roads, being about 2 miles in. The day was pretty cold and windy. Snow had fallen a few days before and was frozen solid. I was sitting on a low branch of a hardwood that made a perfect natural tree stand looking down between the swamps. My buddy was about 200 yards away over a rise at the end of one of the swamps in a climbing tree stand. Around 8 in the morning, I see movement from the end of the deer run between the swamps. Pick up my binos to look. While scanning the area I see movement again. The object was white, obscured by some pines, but I saw it moving. Then, out of the brush it came. I shit you not, a clown. Rainbow frizzy hair, red nose, the whole works. He didn't have on any cold weather clothes that I could tell. He was just kinda wandering around that area looking at the ground. Then I noticed a pistol in his hand. Kinda creepy for sure. I had not walked in from that side so there were no tracks leading my way from where he was. I leaned back on my perch putting the tree between him and I and took off my orange vest. No way did I want this weirdo seeing me. My vest was a blaze orange mesh kinda like a jersey so I stuffed it in my cargo pocket. I peek out again, the clown is sitting on the deer run where he came out, facing me. He is about 100 to 125 yards away. He just sat there for about an hour. I kept looking at him through my binos while staying as much behind my tree as possible. The guy/clown was rocking back and forth with the pistol on his lap. Then, he got up, fished through his pockets and pulled out a set of those wind-up teeth. He wound them, tied them to an overhanging branch on the trail and let them go. The teeth were chattering away. He turns toward where I am, gives a thumbs up in my direction, does a clown laugh and does a clowny sideways run into the bushes. I'm sitting there thinking, WTF did I just see? I sit there until around noon. No other noise, head is on a swivel, or movement. drop down from my perch and put my vest back on. I cut over the hill and cross the swamp, frozen, and head to my buddy's stand. I gotta tell him this, even if he thinks I'm making it up. I find the run he sets up on and follow it in. Around a stand of birch, I see him up in his stand and head right for him. As soon as he sees me, he starts waving his arms and gives me one of those hand / under the neck signals. I freeze. Pull out my binos and look at him. He is about 75 yards away. He does the neck / thing again, the point's behind him, around the tree. Then I hear it. That damn clown laugh. A lot. He looked freaked out. I sat there near the birches for what felt like forever, with my rifle at the ready. The laughing has stopped a while ago. My buddy finally starts climbing down the tree. He comes down the trail to me and says there's some dude dressed like a freaking clown fooling around near my scrape. Then I told him what happened at my spot. We split and told his older brother. A few of the adults all wanted us to show them where this was the next morning. The next morning we headed out toward my spot. When we got there were now 3 chattering teeth hanging on the trail. We found tracks in the snow, clown shoe tracks. We followed the tracks. The tracks cut the long way around one swamp and straight to my buddy's spot. There were chatter teeth honing there too, along with one of those rubber chickens. At this point, they believed us and went all out to find this guy. They never did. Tracks eventually lead to a parking area near a pond a few miles over and disappeared. We were cautious in that area for a long time after that. My uncle has been hunting since he was a teenager. He's in his 50s now. He's not what some would call a manly man, but he's an outdoorsman through and through. A top-notch hunter and angler, and he's a deadeye with any firearm. He's won shooting competitions and once shot the strings off from balloons at varying distances, then shot the balloons as they floated away. This was at a FBI-sponsored public meet and greet after an agent bet him he couldn't do it. He used a new pistol the agency was showcasing. Be it a rifle, shotgun, pistol, doesn't matter. If he wants to shoot it, it gets shot. Anyways, 5 or so years ago he's up by the Canadian/US border with some friends. Lots of lakes up there and very thick forest. A number of the lakes are kept pristine by having a strict no motor policy. You can't have a boat in the water with a motor attached. It's an area that requires a lot of manual work to hunt and fish. You carry everything on your back. No ATVs, no pickup trucks, just miles and miles of forest and water. This is hunting, fishing, and camping in the remotest sense. Him and his friends canoe across a lake and portage a while. Cross another lake. Portage a while longer. Looking for a good place to begin their hunt. After some hours of getting completely engulfed by nature, they come to an area that seems good for setting up camp. The nearest civilization is days away on foot. They are in the proverbial middle of nowhere, which is perfect for the kind of trip these guys had planned. They set up camp and begin their hunt. The plan was to go off in different directions and prospect the area, meet back at camp by nightfall and discuss the plan for tracking the next morning. The men all pick a direction and begin prospecting into the woods alone. At this point my uncle is a couple of hours into his prospect. So, for those of you keeping score, my uncle has entered a remote forest, canoed and portaged for half a day further into the woods, and is now on his own after having hiked even further into the woods. He is as secluded as a person can get. At some point in his hike, my uncle feels uneasy. He's not sure why, but something is starting to make him feel on edge. He has all of his firearms holstered at this point. He continues on his hike, taking notes of the area to share with his friends back at camp. He's busy jotting notes down when he suddenly gets a massive pang of anxiety. Fear begins taking over his faculties and he has no idea why. He starts surveying his immediate surroundings and sees something in the distance. Something oddly out of place. He is now holding his pistol. He moves toward the object slowly and unsure. As he does, he realizes there isn't a single thing making a sound in the woods but him. All of the birds have gone absolutely quiet. He gets close enough to the object to see what it is, a medium-sized Coleman cooler and what looks to be brand new. The juxtaposition of this brightly colored, man-made cooler in the absolute seclusion of its surroundings has my uncle confused to no end, but there it is. Set in the middle of nowhere with nothing or no one around for days, a perfectly new cooler. It's at this point in the story my uncle swears he had absolutely no inclination to open the cooler. In fact, everything in his being was telling him to leave it alone and get back to camp. As if the forest itself were warning him to turn around. He has now traded his pistol for his shotgun and has immediately began hiking back to camp. He says after about 5 minutes of hiking he began to feel better, and after about 7 to 10 minutes he noticed the birds chirping. He made it back to camp within 45 minutes to an hour. He sat around camp waiting for the others to return and shared with them what happened. His friends wanted to find the cooler the next day, but my uncle refused to go looking for it. The rest of their trip was pleasant and nothing out of the ordinary happened. The first time my uncle shared this story was with me and my dad a few days after he got back from his trip. He was visibly upset while talking about it and became short with me when I gave him a hard time for not looking inside the cooler. He has no speculation as to where it came from, what was in it, or why it was there. He just knew, somehow, it was no good. Obligatory not a hunter statement. I was on an ATV on a logging road in central-ish Washington with my then girlfriend. We were with a larger group of friends, but we had separated from them and gone off to explore on our own. Being on an ATV, we couldn't hear the sounds of the forest terribly well, but there was a point where we both realized that there were no sounds. I slowed down and eventually stopped, and turned off the vehicle. There was nothing. It had been raining, but this part of the woods had sunlight coming through the trees at an angle that didn't seem right for the time of day. There was absolutely no air movement despite there being a stiff breeze in the rain. It was like we had turned a corner in the road and entered another dimension. It got weirder. Even though there was no wind, and the trees were perfectly still, the light cast on the ground looked like it was coming through moving leaves. The weather in the entire area was overcast/drizzly/breezy normal Washington weather. Everything was gray. But this area was like someone took a picture of a deciduous forest in autumn and turned the contrast all the way up, which looks very out of place in a pine forest. The light was golden and flickering through the still orange and bright green trees. Then noises started. There was still no wind or birds, but those don't make these noises. The first one was like a bunch of people whispering at the same time, coming from every direction. Then there was a quiet moaning screaming sound from somewhere to the side of the road. It was close. That's when the dizziness started. It was like there was a pressure on my brain and eyes that was just turning everything to a blur. The hair on my neck and arms was standing straight on end. I had the presence of mind to start the ATV and we noped the fuck out of there. Got around the corner in the road and it was raining and windy and overcast. No more stillness or golden light. But the sounds followed for about 2 or 3 minutes. We got back to the group about 10 minutes later. Didn't mention anything about the experience, but when we had loaded up the grills and ATVs into the trucks and were driving back home, we went through that same section of road, and it was raining, windy, the trees were pine, not deciduous, and the sounds were gone. I have no clue what happened, if there was some sort of gas that made us hallucinate, if we had been mildly poisoned somehow, if it was just nerves, or if we stumbled into something entirely different, but we both had the same experience. I have stayed away from the woods for the most part, and if I do go in, I make sure I have multiple people with me. Not a hunter, but frequent camper. Some friends and I discovered a nice spot to camp near Gray's Tories, 214 ers in CO. It appears to be a camp used by hunters, based on the location, and the well-built fire pit, and some tables built between trees. Anyway, we'd camped this spot probably a dozen times. We were in high school at the time, usually camped to party in the beautiful scenery. One particular night we were drinking, and had eaten some acid, and a few of us decided to go on a hike late at night. Not the best idea drunk and high, but we all were native Coloradans, and knew how to be responsible. Anyway, we start hiking further up the road we came in on. I'm using the term road very loosely. You couldn't get to this spot without four-wheel drive and some good clearance, and going past our camp spot was all but impossible in any vehicle other than some serious ATVs, so we're hiking along, maybe a mile up the trail/road and we come across an abandoned mining cabin. It was probably close to 100 years old. So we look inside, and it was nothing but horrifying. Just a mess of old broken rotting furniture, rusting pots/pans, what looked like bloody clothes and mattress. Plus we all just got this feeling of overwhelming sorrow and bad vibes. So we quickly left, back to our campsite. The next morning we told everyone else about our discovery. So they were naturally intrigued, but chalked up our instant fear and dread to the acid we had been on. So we brought everyone up to the cabin that morning, and everyone got the same vibe. Made me reconsider going back to that particular camp spot again, although I have been back since. Solo hunter here. I went on a solo trip into the Rocky Mountains of Colorado to hunt for mule deer. I scout and spend a lot of time in my unit, so I'm quite comfortable with it. August rolls around and bow season opens. So I book it out their opening day, make camp, go hunting, etc. I get back to my tent just before dark and smell cigarettes. Odd. I brush it off as maybe another hunting camp close by and start my fire and relax. I wake up then next morning to find a cigarette butt sitting on the log I had been using as a chair near the fire, just outside my tent. I brought an electrical fence with me, usually used for grizzly area, but my unit is heavy with lions and I usually use it as a perimeter if I need to leave a dead animal out overnight or meet in a tree, and set it up for the next day. I follow my routine of hunting, coming back to camp, starting a fire and relaxing, and eventually falling asleep. However, sometime in the middle of the night I'm abruptly awoken to a scream/cursing. Someone had walked into my electrified fence. I grab my G17 and run out of my tent as fast as I can to sound of someone crashing through the trees. I pursue the sound for a while because I'm not about to let someone scare me out of my week of hunting, which I cherish deeply. I fire a few rounds off into the air, and it's followed by nothing but silence. The next morning I investigate around my campsite and find a stash 15 to 20 cigarette butts within 30 yards of camp, footprints, and what looked like a piss bottle. I decided to sleep in my bevy outside of my camp. I left my tent up, thinking I may be able to catch the person if they come back and think I'm still in camp. They never did. No more nonsense. No deer and unfortunately another year of store-bought factory farmed meat. What's odd is, I was way the hell out there. My camp was 6 miles from the nearest road. It's possible someone had seen me scouting my area and slowly building my camp in the off-season, and wanted it for themselves. This is not a hunting story but definitely involves the woods and a horrifying experience. This happened to my mom, my stepdad, and my baby sisters. This was about 17 years ago and I was not present for it, as I was at my dad's house for the weekend. But, according to my mom, they were all driving back from Strawberry, Arizona, which is a gorgeous little forest town up near the Mogollon Rim. Dense, beautiful forest everywhere. As they're driving through the woods out of the town and down the mountain to head back to Phoenix, my mom says she sees headlights coming up behind them and coming up quick. She doesn't initially think anything of it until the car decides not to pass them and starts tailing them feverishly. She says they tried to drive faster and he would speed up. They'd switch lanes, he would follow them, tailing them all the while. So, my stepdad, possibly not being the most efficient in a scenario of great stress, decides to test the theory on whether or not this guy is actually following them by turning off onto a dirt road that led deeper into the dense forest. He said the road was definitely a clear path and that it was obvious it was a road but that it was still covered with fairly good-sized rocks that made for an incredibly bumpy ride. So, he turns off onto the dirt road. The guy follows him. At this point, my dad realizes he may have fucked up big time and should have stayed on the main, big, paved road down the mountain. My sisters were asleep and, at this point, are awake, bobbing down the road, heads flying everywhere because they were only about 4 at the time, they're twins, mom freaking out, and dad driving at lightning speed deep into the woods. My mom says they were going far faster than that road allowed for and were afraid tires were going to start popping because of the rocks. The guy is behind them still, tailing them the entire way. From what I remember of the story, I believe the dirt road came to a dead end, probably because it ended at someone's property. If I'm remember correctly, this is when shit went from oh, shit, to we're gonna fucking die. But, luckily, my stepdad weaved in between some trees to make a U-turn, possibly the fastest U-turn ever, and raced back down the dirt road and out onto the main street. I can't remember if the guy tailing them never exited the woods to follow them or if he did but drove off into the night on the main road. Either way, I was really scared for my family when they told me that story but also glad I wasn't there. But, at the same time, I felt guilty I wasn't there, even though I know I couldn't have done anything to help them as a 9 or 10-year-old kid. I was just glad they got home safe. Not a hunter, but used to romp the woods behind my best friend's house. We were both teenagers, probably about 16. It was a little late, but we were young and dumb and figured we'd be fine as we made our way back to his house. We weren't talking too much, just focusing on the ground and trying not to trip as we walked back. All of a sudden my flight or fight response wall all the way open. I mean, one instant I was just casual walking wondering what type of Hot Pocket I was going to eat when I got back, and the next I was pumped and ready to fight Mike Tyson. I froze in place and started looking around frantically. I noticed my friend was doing the exact same. We both had our arms up and at our sides in this tense fists clenched pose. For just a moment we were silent and then he says frantically, "Something is out there, it's coming," and I know he's right. I haven't heard anything but something in the core of my brain said I was about to be fighting for my life. I didn't know what to do or what to say, and before I really knew what I was doing I had started screaming this deep growling roar. It was like an animal wearing my skin. I was ready to fight or die. As soon as I did that, we both heard something tear off through the bush into the distance. Couldn't have been more than 10 feet away from us. We both sprinted through the woods, both of us plowing through bushes and tiny trees, ended up covered in bruises from running into shit as we ran out of light. No idea what it was or how we both sensed it at the exact same time. No idea what came over me. Never went back into the woods. Hunting in northern Canada during peak rut with my father and uncle. I hunt from a family spot. Our cabin is near a river. So we will track, hunt and transport by boat before setting blinds and stands. We had set a blind in heavily trafficked area against the edge of a clearing opposite the river. The clearing was surrounded by thick brush in a half circle that wrapped from behind to the sides of us. Across the clearing from the blind was large rocky outcropping that banking the river. Also across the clearing the rocks and trees left an opening of about 20 yards horizontally, which gave us a good view of the river. Rocks ending to the left of the opening and thick brush on the right. We had just downed a moose on the opposite side of the clearing near the large rocky outcropping. This meant that we could no longer see the river due to the large rocky outcropping. This also meant we couldn't see our boats. As we starts courting the moose, this tension builds around us and everything goes eerily quiet. My father looks back to the opening to the river and goes completely still. He motions for me to get down near some willow and for my uncle to slowly pass him rifle. As my uncle is passing him the rifle, the single largest moose I've ever seen in my life slowly starts tracing the edge of the clearing opposite to us. For about 20 minutes this demon paced back and forth, slowly cutting us off from both the blind and our boats. We sat there quietly, not breathing for fear of starting something we definitely would not win. After about the 20 minutes the monster took 3 lumbering steps into the brush and evaporated. We sloppily quieted our moose and packed everything up in record time. Constantly looking over our shoulders as we never knew where the beast melted off to. That is until we got into our boat and watched it swim from our bank to the other bank about 60 yards from our boats. A hunter told me this story when I was younger, about 16 years ago. He was raccoon hunting in the mountains around Blair, West Virginia, around 11 p.m., a new moon night, so no natural lighting. As typical for raccoon hunters, he had 3 hunting dogs, each with a locator collar, for in an event the dogs trailed off and didn't return to the hunter. Also, the use of flashlights are limited while hunting at dark, only use white when needed, if that, green or red lenses recommended. As the dogs caught a scent, they took off through the mountain. The hunter, listening for his dogs to do what they are trained to do, tree a raccoon and bark and howl to let the hunter know they got one treat. But this night was different. He didn't hear his dogs, he instead heard this loud scream/screech, deep sound that neither resembled a human or animal. He noped out of the mountains, thinking he'll return during the light to get the dogs, being careful not to run and make too much noise, as wild animals love chasing. About an hour of hiking back to his truck, he found his dogs hiding under his truck, shivering, something that trained hunting dogs don't do, his dogs specifically. They obviously ran back to the truck, no sign of being chased back to. The hunter swears it wasn't a mountain lion or any other wild animal he knows of, as he has had run-ins with mountain lions and about every kind the WV Mountains has to offer. He said he has never felt so cold and scared in his life from those sounds he heard that night, has yet to hunt on that mountain since the 16 years ago. I wasn't hunting, but there was this time while hiking I'll never forget. 4 of my friends and I are hanging out on a beautiful summer day trying to figure out plans. We're all about 17. I suggest the woods near my house. There's a trail that leads to an abandoned naval airfield. I had traveled this trail several times before this and never had anything like this happen. So my friends and I are walking along this trail and we get to the hole in the fence that leads to the airfield. As we cross through the hole I get a real eerie feeling that makes me stop. Then I notice movement in the brush in front of me. A man in a full ghillie suit holding a rifle stood up from the brush. He didn't say a word as I'm shitting my pants thinking we just interrupted a military exercise by trespassing on government property. Well, I start blurting out, "I'm sorry, I didn't know." Hands up in the air, my other friend silently frozen behind me. This guy starts walking towards, not making a sound. He raises his rifle and points it at us and starts telling us to leave and be quiet. We back off a bit and try to figure out what was going on. The guy starts to follow us, still pointing his weapon, so we scramble to put distance and finally we decide to leave. As we're leaving we started to realize it was an airsoft gun and the guy was pissed we gave away his location. We spent the rest of the walk acting like tough guys, saying had we known we could have gotten past him. I still hike a lot but probably will never hike that trail again. Another not a hunter story. I still lived at home when I was 19, so to get some alone time with my girl we would find a nice spot in the mountains and go at it. One night when we were out there a group of ATV riders came by. This happened every so often, but the riders would just keep it moving and not bother us. This night after they passed us, they got about 100 yards on the road and stopped. Then to my girlfriend's horror, the riders, there were 5 in the group, turned around and started back toward us. She was instantly terrified. I tried to calm her down, telling her it was probably friends of mine. That was very possible BTW. Just in case, I grabbed my pistol from under the seat. The riders stopped right in front of us, blocking my car. I realized these guys were strangers and obviously drunk. I instantly had thoughts of these guys attacking me and raping my girlfriend, and that was not going to happen. I jump out the back seat naked as the day I was born, with pistol in hand. I told the guys to keep it moving and we just wanted to leave. This property was owned by a coal company BTW, so it couldn't have been the owners asking what I was doing. The pistol didn't scare these bozos, and one even asked my girlfriend to give him a peek. I was really scared at this point then, so before I even knew what I was doing, the fear took control and I threw up the pistol and gave them 4 shots over their heads. This got their attention and they all double-timed it back to their ATVs and hauled ass. That was exactly what my girlfriend and I did too. In the opposite direction, of course. What was really scary is that people come from all over the US to ride the trails here. So these guys might have thought they could have done something, then went back to wherever they came from, and no one would have ever been caught. We were both really shook up. I have no idea what those guys' intentions were. Were they just scaring a couple of kids, or were they going to do something darker? I couldn't take the chance though. We stuck to other more secluded spots after this. I wonder what these guys thought when I jumped out the back naked as the day I was born with my heart on. I was 19 folks. It took an act of God to lose an erection, whipping in the wind with a pistol in hand. I know I have never been that scared again.